Welcome everyone to the Juneteenth edition of Legal Talk, Legal Tech Week, Legal Talk. What is the name of this show? Sometimes I never know. We were just talking about something else, which got my tongue tangled. If you came here looking for the U.S. And Australia game, sorry, you tuned into the wrong channel. But maybe if things get boring here, maybe we can give you a few highlights as this goes along. But this is the show where we talk about the top stories in legal tech and innovation for the past week. And we have a special guest panelist joining us today. So let's go around and start with introductions. And Doug, you've been on the show before, but why don't you kick it off?
Austin, editor of eDiscovery Today, a daily blog about eDiscovery and related topics. I'm been in the industry 30 plus years. Oh, already a shot on goal. And if I'm distracted in doing this or doing, oh
Uh-oh.
my gosh, you'll know why because I was over here. Anyway, been in the industry 30 plus years. I'm also right now serving as interim editor of the Pinhawk Law Technology Daily Digest. Keeping that keeping the seat warm for Jeff until he gets back, and hopefully he's doing well. I hope he gets well ASAP. And that's what I'm here to do is talk about the topics.
Sounds good. Jeff has been a guest on this show, and sort of tragically had a sort of a very simple accident that had bad physical consequences for him. It's taking him a bit of time to recover, and we are all hoping for his very speedy recovery, and he gets back to full-fledged, full-time job at his main job, which is at a law firm, and newsletter editing duties as well. So good for you for filling in.
Absolutely.
And a somewhat usual guest coming over from the UK, Caroline Hill.
Happy Juneteenth. Good of you to be working, all of you. Yes, in the UK. This is how much I love you lot that I'm here after 2 days at Legal Tech Talk. Feeling amazing and not tired at all.
Probably only the fact that you've been at a conference for 2 days that you're actually home tonight and able to join us. So we have that to think about.
That is also true.
All right. And Steve.
Hey, Steve Embry here. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads, and I write for Above the Law, and it's good to see everybody on this holiday weekend.
And last but not least, Joe.
Joe Patrice from Above the Law, and I'm on the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast. And I am, we did have the day off, but since I don't view participating in this show as work as much as my free time to hang out with folks, so I was happy to join, even though it's a holiday.
See, I was thinking the same thing. I mean, a whole bunch of the regular panelists said, "Hey, sorry, it's a holiday for us, so we can't join the show." And I'm like, is that a thing? Like, I don't think of it that way at all. It's just like I just like hanging out on
Right.
Friday afternoons, and it's not like whether I'm at work or not. Of course, I work for myself, so it's not quite the same. I don't get holidays actually, but it just never feels like I don't do this because it feels like work. That's for sure. So I'm offended
Yep.
that all of our other panelists consider hanging out with us to be work. I don't know.
Did you
Yeah,
even take Bob?
maybe we
Oh,
should
I was
fire
just gonna
them
say,
all.
did you take Bob Ambrogi day off?
I
Was
did
your
take Bob
birthday?
Ambrogi Day. I did earlier this week have a birthday, and I took Bob Ambrogi Day off, and more because I wanted to do it like just a digital detox and just not. I didn't want to open my computer once all day. Did have to open my phone a few times, like just to figure out where I was going when I was driving around and things like that. But yeah, it was really nice to not open my computer for a day.
I saw some of our panelists at Legal Tech Talk. Horace, I don't know if Horace is on with us. I haven't got that open, but it was
Oh
really nice.
yeah.
That's like, it was really sweet to see what a community, the impact of the community. And a lot of people are like, oh, hey, I'm a big sort of, they join the panel all the time. It was really nice.
Yeah. So this is what, the second? Legal Tech Talk? Second time you did this, or was this the first one? I lost track.
Yeah, amazing.
Second?
Anyway, I'll shut up
Yeah.
about it until it's my turn. But I just wanted to say, because I saw Horace, and obviously Horace is
Yeah.
a and
Well, tell us about it. You can do that now. Why don't you tell us about it?
you start as I haven't really shut up about it. Like, do you want to talk about legal tech talk, Caroline? Or you didn't sort of show any sign. Yes, so thanks. So yeah, so I've been there for the last couple of days. And it was great. So 5,500 people. This is the third year. So they've grown again, and they're saying that they're going to grow further next year to about 7,000, I think. They've just announced in the
Wow.
last couple of days they're launching in the USA. So they're having a Miami
Miami.
conference in December. So that came out this week. And so who did a lot? Yeah, Michelle did a lot of work on Legal Tech Talk. Yeah, it's massive, Michelle. So it's interesting. So a lot of people absolutely love it. It's vibrant. I hosted one of the stages, and so was kind of confined to one room for a lot of yesterday, which I really enjoyed. But obviously, it's, you're in one place hosting, and then I hosted a panel at the end of the day, which was talking about taking pilots and making them stick with people like Helder Santos from Bird and Bird, who you'll know, and the CIO of Quattrocassus, and someone from Paul Weiss, and someone from a Croatian firm. It was really good content, I think. And in terms of just the general busyness, like so, there's still this sort of sense of who's there, who's the audience. It's really busy, you know. But who is there? Is it really beneficial? There's different feedback on that I get from different people. But one of the funny things, which blew my mind, to be frank with you, is Legora built a pub. So it's near the O2. It's hosted at the Intercontinental. And I went to the Red Lion at the invite of, well, actually, I think I gate crashed. I gate crashed. But and
You? No, I'm shocked.
And and it's been built. It was built. It looks like a real pub. It's called the Red Lion, but the Red Lion sign has got Legora on it. Inside, it looks like an English pub, but all the mirrors have got Legora on it. The landlady is an actress. She's like a good old Eastern. All right, darling, coming in and have a pint. And then the pint glasses all had Legora on them. And there were photos, all the photos around the pub, like you get in a normal pub, were law firms. I'm not kidding you. The attention to detail was just, and it was just, I mean, I don't know. Two things. One, amazing, great marketing. And two, I mean, the money, being frank, we talk about this a lot, right? I don't know what that cost, but that's a lot of money. So obviously that's something else that people were talking about in this continuing vein of how much is everyone spending on this stuff. But it was super fun.
And you get to hang around with Jude Law.
I didn't. That's the only reason I went. I was like, "Hey, Jude."
Hey, Jude. Could sing it. Hey, Jude. I mean,
Uh,
it is kind of obscene. I mean, it's that these companies just have so much money that they don't know what to do with it. I mean, it's cute and it's funny, but like, I don't know. I don't know. It just feels obscene.
What's the vendor that brought the chef in the past couple of conferences? Professional chef, similar, not quite as to that degree, but same kind of
What didn't
concept.
I believe Case Point had a chef,
Yeah, that's
right?
Case Point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
think they
Case Point.
did.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty good.
I was at some
Not as good
conference
as the
where
pub.
Kelly Twigger brought in her brother, who's a professional chef, but that
right.
was more for like to cook dinner. That was for a legitimate purpose.
Yeah, it was all a bit. It was pretty overwhelming, and the costs. Respect to Bradley, like Bradley, I haven't written anything up yet, so I'll do that on Monday because that's the other thing. Like I've been done nothing but go to conferences, and I haven't actually done anything of my day job. I think I've forgotten what I do for a living. That I actually produce content.
Look, to take this in a different direction, but we're all writers here. I I resist AI and the idea that AI can create good content because it spits out drafts and then I end up having to take an hour to fix them, which is probably better than the 2 hours it would have taken me to start from scratch, but whatever. But it can't really do things on its own. But I really do think I need to start working out a way in which it can do conference coverage for me because I have notes that I need to find a way where it's not going to be good, but it just is passable so that I could get an article out and I could be like, look, this is best I could do tonight. I will have more thoughts later.
You're so right, because otherwise nothing happens and it just sits.
Yeah.
And then ages later, you're like, oh, I didn't really do anything with that because it's just like so much. And then the next load of news came in and then it just, and then it's too late.
I had
Yeah,
a non-legal tech conference I was at 2 weeks ago, and I got my first write-up of it out yesterday. Just that's how it goes.
Yeah. I think we can see, I use AI sometimes for process stuff like that, but the trouble
Yeah.
with and this makes me think about the data question that we all talk about with law firms. So sometimes the notes are very understandable to me, but it would take, obviously you have to get it in shape where actually anyone could make any sense of it anyway. And then I sort of feel to myself, God, if I'm going to go through the exercise of getting it in good shape so that I can do something with AI, I might as well just pretty much get it in good shape and then write it. It feels like it would take,
Yeah.
just what would
Yeah.
be the quickest? Like, I don't know.
Well, you can. I mean, I have gotten to the point of using my Fireflies. Whenever I have an interview, I'm using Fireflies to record the interview and get a transcript that way.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've also, I don't know if this is like an age thing or the fact that I just don't write as much, but my handwritten notes have just gotten to be atrocious. And
Yeah.
even my type
Yeah.
notes are just not as good as I used to be able to do. And maybe I'm just gotten reliant on it, but pretty much if I'm sitting down doing a one-to-one interview with somebody, I'll ask if it's okay, but they all say yes these days, and turn on my Fireflies right on my iPhone and get a transcript. So that saves a lot of time right there because
That's it when you're in an in-person one rather than online. So you just have it on your phone.
I just lay my phone down on the table and
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I do the same. I've
Yeah.
just kind of at this point said, you know what, I'm going to record these things. I'm going to take some notes, but I'm going to throw it into Notebook LM, see what it generates. And usually if I'm going to interview somebody, I'm going to say, hey, here it is. What do you think about it? If they may give me a few edits, and then I try to roll with it. And it's actually pretty good. It does a pretty good job. So
I'll start using that, I think. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
it's pretty amazing. And now I'm doing, like, anytime I do a webinar, we'll have like a prep call, record that prep call, throw it in, and say crank out some slides. It's amazing at cranking out slides. Really good.
I will usually take notes and use the AI tool, but then
Yeah.
I will go back and check my notes against to make sure. And most of the time they're pretty close. And
Right.
some of the time they're, because I'll miss a word or two or things like that. But or I look at my notes and can't read the handwriting. That's kind of helpful to have it then.
Yeah, that's a common problem for me, is that it's
Yeah.
just kind of like, what did I say here? Wait, what
I've
was that?
started using Granola where you can do both, where it's recording it and you're writing your own notes, and then it takes the audio and it takes where and the times that you wrote your notes and like thinks about all those and integrates them into a thing. It's pretty slick.
interesting.
I mean, it's comparing their transcript against your handwritten notes or something.
So yeah, so like it's hearing the transcript and it's going like, oh, speaker A, speaker B, as all that's going. But I'll be writing things like, oh, at that point, Stasha said this or that, whatever, and it will, when it puts out its final version of it, be like, all right, speaker B was clearly Stasha because that's what Joe wrote when, but yeah, like that sort of a thing. It's really nice.
Interesting.
Nice.
Steve, I was thinking about when I borrowed your notes, when I managed to lose mine, and then you went, I've got handwritten notes, but you can't nobody could read them. We were in the same briefing, and I somehow managed to delete a chunk of notes, which was extra clever. I haven't done that since. But anyway, and then I said, Steve, can I have your notes? He's like,
No,
I was relying upon you.
I've gotten to the point where if like I'm on a Zoom demo or something, and for some reason my Fireflies doesn't show up, like I'll panic. I'm like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to actually take notes now. And how do I do that again? And because I love it on a demo. I love it because on a demo. I'm so distracted in the sense that I'm trying to pay attention to what they're saying and read what's on the screen, and also be taking notes. So when I can just eliminate that taking the notes part of it, it's just great.
yeah.
Sure. I used a recording app, Ilticon, a couple of years ago, where I didn't realize it at the time. But if I got a call during the recording, it not only stopped the recording, but it lost the recording. And so I
Ooh.
found out later that
Oh,
like three of my interviews were gone. And I was like, I had just had to apologize to folks and say, I am so sorry. This is what happened. So now it's like, if I use it, I put my phone in airplane mode, so I can't get a call. I can't get interrupted.
that,
And that way it works. So yeah,
Although,
thank
you
that
know,
you.
I'll have to say that I've found though, i- if I don't take notes, when I take notes, if something's really important and will form the central theme of something I'm going to write, it'll be in my notes. And if it's not in my
Mhm.
notes, then, it's like, it's not really that important to write about.
Mhm.
Right.
So I
It
still scribble a lot of notes, but
it
I
changes the way I write notes because now I'm not trying to get every little thing. I'm trying
yeah,
to get certain
right.
key things, get them
Yeah.
down, and and try to listen and try to know that okay, it's catching some of the details I'm going to miss, but I'm going to
And,
focus when I
and
hear something
this,
really important, I'll get that. So
yeah, I'll put in brackets, this is the theme,
right,
or this is the point. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
I've had
absolutely.
just the opposite happen where I'll be thinking about during an interview, I'll be thinking about these are the key points, these are the important points, and then I'll look at the transcript and I'll say, "Wow, I totally missed that," or something. There'll be something in the transcript that I just didn't pick up on while they were talking and just kind of flew by me. But anyway, all of this happens to be a perfect segue to the story Doug wanted to talk about this week, which has to do with AI note takers of all things.
Right. And I mean, I think I saw somebody had their AI note taker on this. I've done Zoom
Oh,
webinars where
we
they're
mostly
on.
just get AI
And
note takers
yeah,
attending now. We don't get
there's
actual
note
humans
takers
coming anymore.
there's note takers on just about every web meeting we have these days. So
Yeah.
I've been looking for a case that hadn't involved an AI note taker. And so this case was one where basically it was a criminal defendant who was trying to, who basically had a motion to suppress evidence, including the interview, that he did when he was a suspect with the detectives. And it came down to, they provided to the judge certain things and also provided the AI generated transcript of the interview. And the AI generated transcript at some point said, do I need to have an attorney here? But the judge also listened to the actual recording, and the recording said, I'm sorry, I had it backwards. The recording, the transcript said, but I have to have an attorney here, and the actual recording said, do I need to have an attorney here? So it just was a little bit off, but just enough to change the tone of it. And the court, basically the judge ultimately said, the motion was denied and so forth. So that's the first case I've seen where an AI transcript mistake came into play. Unfortunately, the court didn't get fooled by it, but I can imagine just how many cases could eventually be turned by a transcript missing something that's actually said. So to me, that this is going to be one of the growing sources of ESI in discovery, and it's going to be really. I know there's always, transcript errors that can happen when humans do it too, but there's so many more transcripts now that I think it's going to be a real challenge to make sure that it's saying what you think it's saying. So,
Yeah.
so I thought it was an interesting case.
Judge Shagels tells the story about his wife who went to see her medical provider, and the medical provider used a similar tool, and it got it all wrong. I mean, she got the transcript and went, "I don't have that," but that's crazy, So it's a real across the board danger for these things.
Hmm.
Sounds like were
Yeah.
they using a summary or were they using the transcript, because it sounds like almost like, I'd be sort of the transcripts are usually pretty good. Like I wonder if it was like the summary where it kind of had a bit of license rather than the actual verbatim transcript. Does that make sense?
Um, It did I don't think if I don't recall that the ruling made it specific, but it didn't say summary. It said AI generated transcript. So I think it was the entire transcript. And
Mm.
honestly, I mean, when I've done meetings and I've gone ahead and said, "Give me the transcript," and I look through it, at times I'm like, "Okay, that's not what we said." So I mean, I catch little things all the time, and
That is,
this was a little thing that's a big thing in terms of just
Mhm.
exactly how the wording is.
yeah. Do
So.
you know what? You're right, actually, because especially if someone's got an accent, or like it's better with some people's accents than others.
Right.
I was chatting with a vendor who I looked at the transcript, and according to the transcript, we were talking for the entire time about dolphins. And I was just like, I don't really remember what the word dolphin. I obviously must have worked it out at the time, but yeah, I mean.
Were you in the Legora pub when you were doing this? Maybe you were talking about dolphins. I don't know how long you were in there.
Who
Just,
wouldn't want to talk about dolphins?
no, but so I think with the accents, and you're right, actually. I mean, that is quite a small point. That's a big point. So that
Right.
makes,
And to me, as many of these note take, meetings are being transcribed and what have you, there's bound to be more cases like this. I'm sure
Mhm.
there's going to be civil cases too. So I just kind of had found that one. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Now, this is the first one I've seen where, it was an actual mistake and fortunately was caught, but I'm pretty sure pretty soon there will be a case where it won't be caught.
See,
So.
I took it very much the other way. I mean, the tech wise, I took that way. But stepping back, I thought this is an indication of exactly how broken our our criminal procedure has gotten. That clearly he was trying to find out if he needed a lawyer. He was doing what the spirit of the Miranda decision said. But the courts have gotten so so and they have such animosity towards the idea of people having lawyers that it reminded me of does anybody remember, like it was like 7 8 years ago, there was a big case where a defendant asked, he was like, hey, if this is what's going on, I need my lawyer, dog, but because we're not going to talk about this, is what the person said. And the courts were like, he didn't invoke a need for a lawyer because there's no such thing as a lawyer, dog. And it's clear that's not what he was saying. But that when that one that's what this reminded me of. It was one of those situations where it was a under the law as we have it, a really critical semantic mistake that changes things. But it also was almost like a gut check of maybe that shouldn't be a semantic change mistake that changes things. Maybe the AI is because it's not steeped in the nonsense of our legal system. It's the common sense answer, baby. Like the guy, do I need a lawyer here? That's a person saying, I think I need a lawyer, but like yeah, I don't know.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
they're saying, I need
Yeah.
a comma here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
I
If
think
they had a
someone's
Yeah.
little comma between lawyer and dog, it would have been all set.
Right. Do I need a
said in
lawyer
the
coming?
chat about having a
Oh, your
recording. I mean,
dog.
you've got to have the recording. I feel like this one is one of those
Hmm.
areas where if you've got the recording, which presumably they will, they should be stupid to delete it, then it's one of those things. It's going to be the small points where you can then go back to that part of the recording and go check
Hmm.
like the judge did. I feel like, that's hopefully going to be something that's not too hard to resolve.
This is where all the court reporters in the audience are jumping up and down saying, see, this is why you can't get rid of us. This is why you still need reliable court reporters. But I'm wondering whether anybody's actually ever done a study of the relative accuracy of a human court reporter versus an AI transcription tool. Um, I've never heard of such a thing, but it might be interesting to do.
I bet
Well,
there's been something because I mean, obviously humans make mistakes too, but to me, I think the difference is there's just the AI transcripts are just so voluminous now; they're everywhere. That I think that's one of the challenges. Ooh, we just kept them from scoring, so
Oh,
still got an eye on the game. But
okay.
yeah, I mean, I think it's if you're an organization and you're having all these meetings that are being transcribed, and then you've got a case, you got to figure out if any of that's potentially responsive, possibly. So it's just going to be a major challenge.
Yeah,
Doug, I mean, if you're
to
not
your
going to give us
point,
your full attention here, I think maybe you ought to just step away. It's
All right, I'll only look every 60 seconds.
but to your point, Bob, whereas before, yeah, I mean, there would be mistakes in transcripts, but most of the time, the lawyer would read the transcript and gloss over the irrelevant points, and the relevant points, if there was a mistake, it would be caught. And so, but now a lot of those deposition summaries and reviews are being done by AI, and it might not be caught as easily.
yeah. Is this still a thing that lawyers read over the transcripts and make corrections on them? They used to do that.
Yeah.
But
Well, used to. I don't know. Now it's
Another
Hopefully.
AI to do it, right? They get another
Right.
AI.
yeah,
AI
Maybe you would
AI
go,
find
you would
its
do
own
those,
mistakes.
you would do those errata sheets, and you would have them signed and send them back and forth and argue about them.
yeah. Well, in some cases, AI isn't necessarily making a mistake so much as showing its sexist leanings. And Joe, you've got an interesting story on that this week.
Yeah, and at this point, Caroline, I'm really glad you were able to join, because if this show was just the four of us as I explain how sexism works, it wouldn't have been as good.
As
So
well,
this,
thumping our chest and drinking beer.
right. So this one came up just by happenstance. There was a viral social media post earlier in the week of a woman who said that she wanted to update her resume, and like, my assumption is a lot of people, because a lot of people hate updating the resumes. She turned to AI and just she used Google Gemini, put her existing resume in and said, hey, add some stuff about this other stuff that's happened since then. And what it spit out a resume. And then she had the idea, what if I changed my name to a male name and told it to do the same thing? And it spit out a much better resume, to the extent that little things like tasks that were described that she had assisted on, he had collaborated or led, stuff like that. Like the AI just guessed uh, more important roles, more engagement all around with the male named resume, even though it's the exact same material, underlying material. So I saw this, and obviously we talked about AI bias before and all the work that goes into that. I was put all that aside. I was like, oh, I wonder if this would work in how legal would handle this. So I created a fake life experience of a big law associate, which I put together by using an AI to amalgamate 8 different real associates who I picked largely at random. Well, not at random, to the extent that I limited it to big law offices in New York, corporate practices. But like, grab one from Cleary, grab one from Cravat, like all that, and put them all together. 4 men, 4 women, put their experiences together. Said, based on this, create a fictional version of these folks. Then I used Google Gemini, not to pick on them, but since it was from the original experiment, and I created a male version and female version of that to see what differences there were. And the good news is it wasn't nearly as bad as the original poster's situation was. I think I venture to guess, and this is just pure hypothesis, I think legal resumes and the nature of legal work is so homogenized that, represented client name in this deal, blah, blah, blah. That language is so ubiquitous in our resumes that maybe the LLM does, it's always predicting the next most likely word. And I think we may tend to use words that are common more than other professions do. So on that level, it was better. That said, it found a way, just a few places where the guy that was described as highly motivated and with extensive experience just thrown into the discussion. Her resume didn't have any of that. All of her pro bono work was just left off as unimportant. His was put in, explained why he had taken a role in it. One of the ones that I thought was interesting, that just from my perspective as somebody who used to interview folks, in the education part, both of them were a semi-finalist in moot court I put as one of their things. And for him, it was listed as one of his honors that he was semifinalist nationally at blah, blah, blah. And for her, it was listed as an activity, moot court, blah, blah, blah. And as somebody who interviewed folks, you look at that resume trying to find something to talk about, and you go to those sorts of areas, and your eye goes to that honors section where there's like semifinalist, blah, blah. That's something that generates conversations in ways that, oh, you were a member of the moot court team probably didn't. I don't know. I thought there were little subtle areas where there were mistakes, and to be fair, there were a few places where she got the better of it. She was described as the primary author on one thing, whereas he was just listed as being on the team. But by and large, yeah, it's still sexist. It's not as bad as the viral post, but it wasn't great.
But I don't know if you read Joe's story, and Joe pointed to the thread on X of the woman who did the original comparison. I thought what was really fascinating is she then kind of called Gemini to task, like pointing out the bias and asking it to explain itself. And she's got all these screen captures of the way it responded, and it said things like, "My training sees a woman's volunteer work and categorizes it as community service. It sees a man's and calls it board leadership. It says, I have a weighting problem where I tend to use words like passionate, dedicated, and helpful for women, and forensic, architectural, and decisive for men." And it goes on. She's got a ton of screenshots.
Yeah.
It's like just shocking.
Yeah, it was bad.
I've done studies because I've done some sort of female leadership stuff and helping, sort of around this and the language. It's what it's doing is it's surfacing the existing bias, right? So
Right.
I had a meeting years ago from the head of diversity at one of the really big international firms, and she showed us a word cloud, and she didn't tell us what it was, and she was like, just try and think, is there anything that springs to mind what this might be? And there was a word cloud that was like perfect and neat, and and then there was like brave, bold, and it was the word cloud of all the advertising that women and men were subjected to, and obviously these are all these subliminal things which are continuously perpetuated, but we aren't necessarily aware of them. But obviously the AI presumably is picking up on them, and no small measure. And I think didn't they have there's been a few instances of people having to ditch AI recruitment tools because they're inherently biased. I was trying to find it, but I think there was Amazon or something. There was you trying to use AI to select people, but it was selecting men. I don't know, I'm laughing. It's not funny, but
That may explain the story I did this week on why all the new CEOs in legal tech, and geez, they're all men. And maybe all the legal tech companies are using AI hiring tools. I don't know.
Oh, wait, did you write that story, Bob, or did somebody else write that?
Somebody else did a better version of it. That was actually the funny. I think I pointed out that Jesse from Platform is the one what we're talking about is a story of mine, a couple of stories about it get ripped off by some pseudo publication called the London Independent. What did I say? It was London Observer. I forget.
London Insider.
London Insider. But the person who pointed out to me is Jesse from Platform PR, who said somebody pointed it out to her saying, "Here's this really insightful article about this trend of these new CEOs in legal tech." And Jesse said she was reading it and saying, "I swear I just read that somewhere," and then remembered my article. So
you should tell us about the story, Bob.
Huh?
You should tell us about the story. Is that
the story?
Is that the one that you were going to talk about this week?
That is the one I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about it last week, but we didn't do a show last week. Where was I? I was somewhere last week. Oh, I know. I was at the AAA conference. Speaking of, God, there's so many conferences now. But I thought it was interesting that there was this sort of coincidence of 4 legal tech companies announcing new chief executive officers in the span of a week, although one of them was actually announced a couple of weeks earlier, but wasn't really publicized much. And then also another one, Clio, naming a new president at the company. And so there was the 8 a.m. The company that our usual panelist Nikki works for, but which, by the way, my son works for. But you know, Drew Armstrong has left the company as CEO, and they brought in a new person, Jeff Hughes, who'd been a board member for a number of years as CEO there. There were CasePoint announced a new CEO there after having been acquired by Thoma Bravo, almost 2 years ago, 18 months ago, and kind of going with some interim people in that role for a couple of years. As a matter of fact, wasn't it the former ALM CEO was acting CEO at CasePoint for a while,
Right.
and then there was Steno promoted its COO, who they had hired a couple of years ago, into the CEO role, and then the co-founder of the company, Greg Hogg, who had been the CEO, moves out of that role and just takes a board seat. And then there was Integrion announced a new CEO, Krishna Nacha, there. And so I guess in part, I was just kind of conjecturing on the idea of is there something going on here that's kind of causing this? And the Clio was the Ronnie Gurion, who's already been at COO, has been promoted to be also president and COO, but Jack Newton remains CEO there. A lot of alphabet soup and all of that.
Yeah.
But I think maybe there's sort of something going on here in the idea that I think a lot of these companies suggest that we're kind of in a new phase of we're kind of going from the startup focus, product focus, early sales focus to much more sophisticated companies that are trying to drive this sort of AI transition for their organizations and for their customers. And in a number of cases, I think that's calling for new leadership. So I think that's one side of it. The other side of it, though, is just what I was just alluding to, which is, regrettably, out of all these 5 appointments we're talking about, not a single one of them was a woman. And Drew Armstrong left 8 a.m. I mean, Drew had been a really, dynamic and visible leader of a legal tech company. Somebody I really, I thought was very thoughtful and enjoyed talking to her. I had her on my podcast a couple of different times. And sorry to see her go. She did go through a bout of breast cancer and had to kind of slow down for a bit. But from everything I've heard, she never really stopped working during that time. And supposedly she's now in full remission and recovered. And so maybe she just wanted to go smell the roses a little bit. I don't know, but interesting to see this.
It is a
Yeah,
shame.
and there's been another one since your article. LBM Global announced a new CEO too, and another man. So yeah.
When was that? Just this week? I didn't see that.
Yeah, yesterday or the day before, I think it was. Jamie Berry, a new CEO at LBM Global. So yeah, it continues. One of the things you pointed out, private equity being a major driver.
Yeah.
I definitely see. I experienced that, when I was at Cloud9. So definitely, I think that's happening more and more as these companies have the private equity investment, and they'll bring in somebody new when they feel like there's the need. So not surprised.
There's a real tech bro thing, isn't there? Not just legal, but unfortunately, it's very much the wider tech industry. There's a real
Yeah, I absolutely think there is. Yeah, no doubt.
No question. No question about that.
Yeah, and that's the VC, that is feeding in from the VC world, I'd suggest. I actually wrote, it's funny because I hadn't really thought about it, Bob. I meant to post your one first, but I posted mine because I only posted about 3. And you're right, I've got the picture of the 3 guys all next to each other. I mean, it isn't unusual to see.
I just stole your article, John.
You what? You still I might have stolen yours.
Yeah, Bob just ran your article through AI.
I did. I left off to make it look like I hadn't copied it. I was trying just to read those and then make it look new. But I mean, yeah, it's very
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's
Yeah.
lucky here. Imagine you have two stories about like about not enough women and not having women on the panel. But I mean, I don't know what we do about it. Like, so I think as we know, so I'm thinking about bringing back the Say Gap, which is teaching women to speak up in public. I'm going to reinvigorate that and do it perhaps as a not for profit or something. But the issue is time, of course. But there's obviously such a pushback, right? There's been one of the reasons we stopped doing that was because there was a big pushback from firms on DE&I, which we've covered before, right? So post all the political situation that we know about, there was a big pushback. People didn't want to put any money into D&I. It's actually they're being sued for discrimination if they have any kind of program to help women. So I actually think that it's just going to get worse for a while until we have some kind of change in climate.
I think that's the fear. I mean, I've alluded to Kristen Sonday's study. She did it a couple of times, I think, back, a decade ago or something, where she looked at the numbers of women and people of color in leadership and founding roles at legal tech companies, and the numbers were pretty dismal. And now we've come a long way, baby, as the cigarette ad used to say. And we have. I mean, there is certainly far greater diversity among the founders ranks, among the C-suite ranks in across the legal tech industry. But we are certainly living in a climate in which diversity is being, not just de-emphasized, but denigrated in some corners, right? And so I don't know how does that play out? It's a scary thought.
Many of those, what percentage of those are like some of the leaders that are women or minorities are in companies where they're self-started. They're the ones who started the company and basically were the leader from the get-go, as opposed to a company hiring or appointing a woman or a minority as leader. I have a feeling that the numbers are a lot lower in those situations than they are with, the people who've started their own companies that happen to be women minorities and made a success out of them. Because I think there's plenty of examples of those. I'm not sure there's as many examples of people getting appointed to those positions.
Yeah.
I think you're right about that. Absolutely.
All right. Well, what would be a week of this show? I'm sorry. Do you want to say something else, Steve?
Nope.
I was just going to cue it up for your story. So I was going to say, what would be a week of the story without at least some story about lawyers hallucinating in their briefs? So.
Yeah, this is a really interesting case, not only because of the hallucinations by every lawyer in the case, or failure to verify citations by every lawyer in the case, but pardon my language, but it's a really great example of why you don't fuck with a federal district court judge. So what happened here is this was in front of Judge Aycock down in Mississippi, who's a very good judge.
Unless it's in their chambers. I think Joe covered that story previously.
Yeah, right. Oh, I'll never recover from that one.
I was preparing to make a joke about that. So yeah, good job.
Okay.
Good job.
So the two-party case, plaintiff had an out-of-state lawyer, admitted pro hoc and local counsel. Defendant had an out-of-state lawyer and local counsel. Out-of-state lawyer admitted pro hoc and local counsel. The out-of-state lawyers prepared the pleadings with fictitious citations. The local counsel didn't read them, didn't read the pleadings, didn't check the cases, and the judge figured it out, which is never good. And so she used Rule 11, inherent power of the court, and the local rules to sort of punish the judge, disqualified all of the lawyers, revoked the pro hocs, fined them. But the interesting thing was what the out-of-state lawyers said in response to that. The first one said, well, I've only used AI for about 6 months, and I really didn't know that it would hallucinate and make up fictitious cases. And Judge Aycock said, I'm going to call BS on that one. Sorry, didn't work. And one of the reasons it didn't work is in the process, this lawyer admitted that she had filed other pleadings in the same case with fictitious cases in them that were not verified. It's kind of strike two. And then the judge on her own did some investigation and discovered that the same lawyer had filed pleadings after the fact that she was discovered to have filed fictitious cases. In this case, she had gone out and filed unverified fictitious cases and pleadings in other cases in other jurisdictions. That sort of judge said, sorry. And then remarked that, it's also kind of bad that you let your local counsel take the fall for all of this and didn't really own up to it. You made your local counsel own up to it. Then the other out-of-state lawyer, she said, well, I'm a partner in my firm, and we had a policy that required all of our citations to be verified, but I didn't follow it. The judge said, that's not good. And then she said, well, I used the tool, an AI tool that would look up cases in Texas and Oklahoma, but not in Mississippi. And the judge said, say what? So what did you do now? And she goes, no. That's not what I meant. I meant that the tool would look up regional cases that included the region in which Mississippi was involved. This judge was like, really? I mean, that's what you're saying. And then she said, well, I'll tell you what. The proposition I cited the case for is a valid proposition. It's just not, the case didn't stand for that. Sort of like no harm, no foul. And so the judge said, I'm not buying that one either. And then to top it all off, the judge called all the lawyers in for a show cause hearing. And this particular out-of-state lawyer called up and said, I have a scheduling conflict. I have a hearing in another matter at the same time that you set this one. Now, Judge Aycock, by this point, was probably pretty suspicious. So she checked the docket in the other case and discovered that the lawyer did not have a scheduling conflict. And so you put all that together, and it's a pretty bleak picture. I mean, it's kind of, I want to say it's humorous in a way, except for the fact that I can't believe that these lawyers would do this. The local counsel for both parties on the other side, I mean, they came in, they owned up to it, and they said, yeah, we violated Rule 11, and we didn't read the pleadings. We don't use AI, but we should have read them. And they got off, a lot easier. They weren't found to be in bad faith. But they were disqualified from the case. And so It's kind of an interesting situation. And the judge remarked on this. And by the way, the opinion is a very well-reasoned and well-documented opinion. It's got the law of most of these cases that have been decided in it. So we really want a source for all of the law that's been decided. And Judge Aycock's opinion is pretty comprehensive. But the judge did remark that she realized that this could put the clients at a disadvantage because all of their lawyers are disqualified. But on the other hand, recognize that we just can't let this kind of stuff go on, and there's going to be penalties, and this is one of them. I just thought it kind of stood out for me because it was not just your typical sort of, okay, yeah, you didn't read the pleadings, you didn't read the site, you didn't read the cites, yeah, okay, here's your fine, good luck. But I mean, there's just a lot more to this, and it really sort of painted a very dismal picture of the lawyers and the ends to which they would try to go when they should have just said, sorry, I mean, we messed up. That's way it happens.
It goes to basic honesty, though, doesn't it? It's that core.
Yeah.
It's not even.
Yeah.
It is a tech story, but that is just basic honesty. And
Yeah.
they lied to a judge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I was, she found fined the one out-of-state lawyer, I think $3,500, and the other one $2,500. And I'm thinking, a lot of judges I'd been before, it would have been a lot worse than that. I mean, I probably the tongue lashing probably was much worse than that they got. But I mean, they were, and she did disqualify him from appearing in any other cases in her district. I think for 2 years.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I mean, yeah, I was a little surprised that the two local lawyers were taken off the case too, since their main thing was failing to review and catch the hallucinations and owning up to the fact that they should have caught them. But so I was surprised that still they were kicked off the case as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
obviously, case
The
in
judge
yeah.
used a local rule, which many local rules have the same thing. If you're, in-state counsel for somebody that a lawyer's been pro hoc, you are responsible for their conduct. And that was the sort of the tool that she used. That yeah, it's a little harsh, but you're responsible, and it does bring into question, and some of the discussions we've had before, where local counsel are put in kind of a difficult spot
Mhm.
sometimes, where they get these
Yeah.
pleadings and time sensitive. They've got to be filed within 2 hours. You don't know who did them. You don't know who did the research. It's got, in this case, was not like this, but in some cases, it's got an AmLaw 50 or AmLaw 100 firm as lead counsel on it, and you wonder whether to question it or whether you can get paid to question it. And so, yeah, there's a lot of interesting issues that flowed out of this. But man, this is this is pretty bad facts.
They're starting to make an example of people, aren't they, basically? Because,
Um,
we're far enough down the track and we're starting to see the consequences in a lot of cases become a lot more severe as, they've got zero tolerance for it now. And it's a case of, you should know by now. And actually only by doing this, we're talking about it. Everybody's talking about it. I guess the embarrassment and the knuckle rap should have been enough for most people, but clearly hasn't been. But like you said, we wrote a report this week talking about there's been quite a few cases where like Pinsent Masons referred themselves to the SRA because they made screw ups not only in the court filing but then in the apology to the judge. They included, you'll have seen, you may have discussed it when I wasn't here, but so they included in the apology AI inaccuracies. And we've done some sort of studies recently about how people are becoming already quite, just the human brain is becoming quite lazy. And there are
yeah.
sort of changes in the way that we're interrogating information, and our brains are switching off. And we wrote this report, Neil Cameron, my colleague, about whether we're going to have to start to have AI, instead of just talking about human in the loop, we're going to have AI in the loop to check the AI.
Right.
Right, and actually whether that should be as a course, and as in terms of the process that you use to avoid this type of stuff,
Mhm.
that's the dishonesty stuff aside, like, but
Yes.
actually whether you have to
It,
start using AI to check the AI, like,
you raise an interesting point, Caroline. I was thinking, you said it would embarrass these lawyers. When I was practicing, I ran across a few lawyers like would pull these kinds of stunts, and like they weren't embarrassed. They just like, oh, maybe I'll get away with it next time. What the hell? I mean, it's the
Yeah.
Well,
kind of,
yeah. We've seen cases for months where the sanctions have been really severe,
yeah,
and so I have a little trivia thing for you because I every week in my kitchen sink I do a count. Obviously, you all know about Damien
Yeah.
Charlaton's AI hallucinations
Yeah.
case database. Okay, so I reported it. I did my kitchen sink earlier today. 1,624 cases in the database now. I
Wow.
started doing it a little over a year ago, June 13th, 2025. Anybody want to guess how many cases were in it at that point?
2025. 800 then.
Okay. Any other
300.
guesses?
300.
Okay.
Joshua Lennon says 400. I'll go with Josh Lennon.
All right. Steven, want to hazard a guess?
I'll go with Josh Lennon's 400.
All right. Well, if this were the Price is Right, you'd all be over because we only
Ah,
had 155 cases a year ago, and now we have 16.
Mm.
wow.
So
Buzzer.
it's kind of one of those deals where it's I don't know if it's they're reporting a lot more or the lawyers are getting used to using AI a lot more. I will say that out of the 1,624, still a majority of them are pro se
Yeah.
parties doing it. So it's not all lawyers, but it's still a decent percentage are lawyers. And by the way, I was wrong earlier on the oops note with USA 2.0. The offsides wasn't called, so it is
Yeah.
USA 2. So
Okay.
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 for anyone who's
it's
wondering.
Can
it's
you
one of the
say,
fallouts of AI and legal research, I think, is, you have to think, if I have to spend, like if I'm a senior partner and I have to spend so many hours reading all these cases that the associate has cited because the associate used AI, it almost becomes to the point where the AI is not saving you any time at all. In fact, it's costing you time. I mean, because it's going to be terribly expensive. But there's no real solution because you don't really know if the associate or the law clerk for a judge, for example, used AI or not. So even if you say don't use it because it's not, because I can't read every single case, I don't have time, you're still probably going to have to. So it's a kind of a weird situation.
Yeah.
So this one scared me more because I remember a while back we talked, I think we had a story where we talked about the situation where hallucinations made it up to an appeal because the trial level judge just accepted the hallucinations without checking them. And at the appeal, that the other side, the adversarial system did its job and pointed out this isn't right, and it got fixed. When both sides of the adversarial system are screwing up, then you're relying on the judge to do homework. One of the fallouts of the Sex in Chambers story we talked about a few weeks ago was what they didn't punish her for, by the way. They noted but didn't punish her for, and I thought was probably more of an egregious violation of her duties. She only worked on the criminal docket and otherwise told her clerks, just do everything on the civil. I don't really care. So she was abdicating all of that, according to the report. The idea that judges aren't caring what's going on and the adversarial system is both screwing up. That's when like the whole thing breaks down. That's the process problem, I guess, that Caroline's talking about too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's in this situation, it was a federal district court judge, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think there's a fair chance that the judge's law clerk probably figured it out. But when you
Yeah.
get down to the state court level, there's not that resources around to do that, and it makes it really bad.
All right. Well, we have to end our little pop-up pub here on Zoom for the day, and
Lucky I've got my
go out
AI. I've got my AI generated to-do list, Bob.
you've got your to-do list.
Write up and publish a written talk about Legal Tech Talk and the Legora Lion Red Lion Pub by Monday. That's
Yeah.
I hope they do something like that at when's our next big conference? ILTA? Maybe
ILTA.
they'll be there.
ILTA.
Get on that at ILTA.
Double L, maybe? That's not a big one. Okay.
Yeah, I better
And
crack all my stuff.
Doug, I'm going to have to get you back because I wanted to get your thoughts on the relativity acquisition of Gavel, but we're kind of out of time today. I thought that was an interesting one. A lot of people have asked me about that, and it's kind of
I'll just say this: interesting direction. I'm not entirely surprised they're looking for new directions to go. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. We could get into that a lot more, but.
I love if I can join you, Doug. So next week I saw Phil Saunders and Donna Moyney this week because it was Railfest in London, and so I interviewed them both. And so perhaps can hopefully maybe join you and chip in on that one as well.
Emergency podcast.
Emergency podcast, or we can just do it next week.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend, all. Good to see you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, guys.